You might already know how to form basic chords like this minor chord, and even inversions and basic seventh chords, and still want a way to play more colorful, juicy voicings like this one. Now, this is part of a larger conversation about how to play beautiful harmony at the piano. And it's good to remember that when we respond to a beautiful chord progression, we're hearing not just a single voicing, a single moment in time, but we're hearing the entire piece of music. So getting too focused on individual voicings is a little bit like thinking that the way to make a great argument is to learn big vocabulary words. But you're here to learn about juicy voicings, so let's talk about them. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. I want to give you some simple guidelines for how to prioritize the different parts of a chord so that you can add or take away complexity in a chord voicing. We're going to give 3 levels of priority, and the first level of priority is melody and bass. The bass is the most important note in a chord, and you can tell that because we name chords by their bass note. If this note is on the bottom, this is going to be some kind of B flat chord, and I can change almost everything else about the chord, and this will still be the name of the chord, B flat something. And melody is also crucial. Our ear is really drawn to the top note of any chord or chord progression. So even when you're playing a part that's really in the background of a bigger production or arrangement, for that keys part, our ear is going to be drawn to the highest note as a kind of melody. So for the example chord that I'm playing, I have B flat on the bottom and C on top. And it's good to recognize that just those 2 notes by themselves already create a really interesting sound. The melody and the bass note have a bigger impact on the chord that you're playing than anything else we're going to look at. So our second priority, once you've taken care of the melody and the bass, is to look at your other most important chord tones. Now, for this to make sense, you're going to need some prerequisite skills. You're going to need to be able to label chord tones based on the root note of a chord. For that, you need to know your major scales. You also need some basic understanding of chord notation, all the different kinds of chord symbols you might see. So for both of these things, major scales and chord symbols, I have free PDF resources, and you can just go to my website and you'll find those. In this example, I'm playing some sort of B flat minor 7 chord. It's become a B flat minor 9 because I have the 9 on top. But I still want to fill out the other important parts of that B flat minor 7 sound. So I'm going to start by taking care of my 3rd and my 7th. The 5th is not as important a part of this chord because the 5th is actually a part of the overtone series of the bass note. So we're kind of already hearing this pitch very gently just because of the physics of that lowest note. So a good place to start is with the 3rd and the 7th. And I could just play these down here in the same octave as the bass note, or I could even play them up here. But I like them in the middle because I like the way that it spaces things out evenly in this voicing. And we could totally just stop here. You know, if you were writing this chord, this harmony for 4 voices, this might be how you would spread it out. And it's already a very rich, complex sound. But let's say you want to keep going. You want to keep adding complexity, or at least you want to keep adding notes. Think about what's left. We really just have the 5th of the chord left, so we can add that in. And then if we want, we could add on extra extensions. We could put the 11th of the chord in, or even the 13th. With this B flat minor 11, 13, 9 chord, I've actually used every single note in B flat Dorian. So this is starting to be a very, very rich sound. And maybe that's exactly what you're looking for. If you don't want to hear that 11th and 13th added in, but you still want to add more notes, well, you can start doubling things. So after I've added in the 5th, I could also double the melody an octave lower. That's often a really nice move because it emphasizes the sound of the melody. You can see here I actually have my thumbs overlapping with each other. I just think that's a little easier to do physically for me. By the way, don't be discouraged if you can't reach this distance that I'm reaching. This is called a 10th. And for one, you might surprise yourself with what you can reach if you're willing to deal with like very little real estate on the edge of the keys. I actually have a stub thumb in my left hand, so it's kind of difficult for me to reach these big intervals with my left hand, but I've figured it out over time. My left hand has stretched out a lot. But if your hand just can't handle that kind of distance, you can totally play juicy voicings with less than an octave in each hand. So we've added in the fifth, we've added in a doubled ninth to double the melody. I could also double this seventh up an octave. And that's kind of nice because it gives me this really clear triad shape in my right hand, and I often look for this kind of triad shape based on an upper structure of the chord. This is an F minor shape. And that's a great way to find these shapes in your right hand that if you want, you can arpeggiate up the piano. So at this point, we have a really nice sounding voicing. We have bass, melody, seventh, third, and then we've added a fifth and some doubled notes. And it might seem kind of funny to build the chord in this way as opposed to just like, I don't know, going bottom to top. But this is really how I come up with harmony most of the time, is that I'm taking care of the most important parts of what I want to hear first, because not all chord tones are created equal. And thinking of chords this way gives you much more adaptability when you're actually arranging for multiple instruments. Say you're arranging for a string quartet. You typically only have 4 notes or maybe a couple extra notes if you're writing double stops. And so if you want to write complex harmony, you need to understand how to do that with only 4 voices. So let's see how this plays out on a chord that might often follow this B flat minor chord. Here's an E flat dominant 7 chord. Now the voice leading here is a lot easier for me because this happens to be a 2-5, part of the famous chord progression 2-5-1. So if you practice a lot of 2-5-1s or you play music that uses 2-5-1s, it gets to be really easy to quickly find good voice leading from one chord voicing to the next for this particular chord progression. But even if you were starting from scratch, you could follow the same approach to find a good voicing for this next chord. And we have the bass on E flat, melody on C. Let's find third and seventh. That's already a really nice voicing. And hey, it has great voice leading from where we came from. Now let's add some other things. I'm going to not add the fifth here. I'm going to instead start by doubling the melody, doubling the third, and then adding a flat 9, so that again I get this triad shape in my right hand. And listen to how that sounds. Now, if I had fewer voices to work with, say I was coming from this chord, I might just do this and stop here. And again, I have melody and bass, third and seventh, and those are the most important parts of the chord. And if you listen to the difference between these two versions of the chord progression versus the second one is definitely juicier. There are more notes, it's a little more complex, but the fundamental sound of the chord progression is the same in both versions. So you can see it's helpful to understand these levels of priority when it comes to the notes in any given chord. Now, as I said, individual voicings like this are just a small part of a bigger topic of how to write and play compelling harmony at the piano. So subscribe to my channel if you want to see other upcoming videos on harmony. I'm Ted with Piano Fluency, and thanks for joining me.